So this is my first time up here. I'm Alejandro Alonso Galva, and my girlfriend thought it was a good idea for me to do hot yoga right before this. So if I sound like I have a stroke, it's because I did. So my story is about the type of scars you get when you do or you say something that you would have done differently if you would have just known a little bit better. And it's about my dad. So Alejandro, obviously, what does that mean? Where am I from? I'm from Arecibo, Puerto Rico. I was born there to a Cuban refugee, my dad, who fled from Fidel Castro's Cuba, and to a small-town farm girl, my mom, from Costa Rica, and we were dead broke. We had nothing in Puerto Rico. My mom used to have to take a calculator to go to the grocery store so that she could calculate how much money we exactly had and get the sales tax just right. My dad, because he was, again, a refugee, he was so poor that when he went to pick up my mom for their first date at my grandma's house, he parked the car 4 blocks away because it was such a piece of crap that he was embarrassed that my grandma would see it. But thanks to Jimmy Carter, who, by the way, is eligible to run again. Thanks to Jimmy Carter, my father was able to go to medical school. And so we knew, okay, Papi, he's studying, things are going to be okay. Eventually a letter comes and my dad is able to go to the Ohio State University, for a fellowship. And we get there, and if we thought we were poor in Puerto Rico, oh my God, the United States prices were even worse, and it was even more terrible. But again, we knew my dad was working hard, and we knew things were going to be okay. My dad starts his program at Ohio State. He meets his boss, his attending, and he is a racist beyond belief. He is a racist who pushes my dad in the middle of surgeries, away from the patients, tells my dad, "You are worthless. You don't speak English. How the hell do you think you're going to ever become a surgeon?" And my dad would come home from the Ohio State every day and just break down to my mom. But my mom, being that strong farm girl, would look at my dad and say, "You're working hard. It's going to be okay." And what Papi's boss, his attending, didn't understand is that it doesn't matter what language you speak when it comes to scars. It doesn't matter what language you speak when it comes to working on the human body. You don't have to speak the same language to save a life. And so my dad worked hard, and eventually he was able to get a job at the University of Nebraska and leave the Ohio State University. He works hard, and eventually he is promoted to Chief of Cardiovascular Surgery for the University of Nebraska Medical Center. And he buys my mom a house, he buys my mom a car, and mama doesn't have to go to the grocery store with a calculator anymore. He buys my mom the American dream. But, again, my dad's Cuban, and just to give you a little description of him, imagine if Al Pacino playing Scarface, imagine if Scarface wasn't about a drug dealer, but it was about a surgeon. That was my dad, right? He'd be like, "Say hello to my little friend." Scalpel. That was my dad. He was gregarious. He was overconfident. Sometimes he would get called by the hospital, and they would say, "Dr. Alonso, you are due in surgery." And he'd be like, "Oh, I'm just in the office. I'll be there in a minute." And he was at home. And he would get to the surgery 40 minutes late, but he would still finish an hour or two ahead of all the other surgeons. He just had that thing. And well, he did well, and when he got his job, he decided to treat himself. Remember that crappy car he had to pick up my mom? Well, he decided he was going to level up, and he bought himself a 911 Porsche. Ooh, right? Impress grandma with that. And he drove fast, and my mom started to repeat a line every day at dinner like, "Anselmo, Anselmo, you drive too fast. Anselmo, you drive too fast." And one day, he drove to work too fast, and he didn't come home. And I remember, I'll never forget, my mom answering the phone and knowing that it was a bad phone call because I heard the phone ring, and 2 seconds later I heard my mother scream. And I asked her, "What's wrong?" And she said, "Your father's been in a car accident." And she went rushing out the door. And she said, "You're in charge. Take care of your 4 other siblings. You're in charge. I got to get to the hospital." And my brother looks at me and he says, "Alejandro, what happened?" And I said, "Papi's been in a car accident." And he says, "Why?" And I said, "Because Papi's stupid." Scar number 1. And so my mom's at the hospital. She sends Clara, our babysitter, over to take care of us. And we all go into the Nintendo room to wait it out, right? The little room that all the kids hung out in. And in this room was a fax machine that never worked. Remember fax machines? You had to send a little thing. This thing never worked. But the phone was still viable. And so when my mom would call with updates, I'd grab the phone and I'd listen, and she'd say, "Anselmo's going into surgery. Anselmo is out of surgery. We're waiting to hear back. Anselmo's going back into surgery." And then the phone rings again, and I answer the phone, and my mom says, "Are the kids listening?" And I said, "Mommy, sí. Yes, we're listening." And I take the phone, and I put it on speakerphone, and I set it down, and I said, "We're listening." And my mom says, "Anselmo se murió. Anselmo's dead." And my mother heard our screams go up the stairs all the way to the second floor and into the receiver of Clara's phone, because this fax machine's receiver was broken. My mom never knew she was talking to me the whole day. And so Clara comes down and realizes what's happened and calls my mom, and my mom looks at me and says, "You guys weren't supposed to find out like this. I was going to come home and tell you." And this was, I'm the man of the house now. And I remember just thinking, I had one job today. And that was to just take care of my siblings and to relay the news. And I screwed that up. Go to the hospital, and I'm sitting in the waiting room, and I am with my best friend. And he says to me, or I say to him, "This is the worst day of my life." And he says to me, "You'll have worse." And though I did not have the vocabulary that I have now, I remember thinking, "You're an idiot." But I also realized he doesn't know any better. I don't know any better. These are the mistakes we make. And little by little started to come to grips with these little mistakes that happen in these moments. But to this day, I think about that all the time, and this is actually the first time I ever told this story. But I think about it all the time, and I still see my brother's face and my sister's face when through the phone my mother said, "Anselmo se murió." So I guess my story is about learning to forgive yourself for those little scars that happen, because we're human, and sometimes we just don't know any better. Thank you.